So tonight we're taking on the concept of identity, or at least God's will in our identity. And the reality is God's will on this is really simple to figure out. God's will is for us to realize that we are children of God. That all of us are children of God, that you're a child of God, I'm a child of God. No matter what we think, what we feel, what we believe, we are all still children of God, first and foremost. And with that comes a need for a certain level of dignity and rights and all those sorts of things you hear in grand constitutions and stuff, right? Those sorts of things. But it's more than just that. It's not just the recognition of it, but it's the actual living out that as our core central identity. Now, I have that identity, so does my 1-year-old, okay? But as you grow up, you pick up other identities. Now, some of these identities or labels one picks up are going to be really healthy, right? So, for example, I am a child of God, but I'm also a pastor, right? I'm also a dad. I'm also a husband. I'm also a person who likes the Miami Dolphins for yet unknown reasons. I am all these things. And so all these identities swirl around, and identities compete with each other, or at least can. And so the first struggle that I see that people really have when it comes to identities is making sure that you have making sure that that identity as a child of God stays in the center. Right? You want to make sure that you know that you are loved, that you are forgiven, that you are filled with grace and wisdom from the Creator God out there. And I want you to never forget that. And yet it is so easy in our day-to-day lives to forget to live that out. To forget that that is true of me, it is true of you. That you are loved, that you are cared for, that you are holy, just as I am loved, I am cared for, I am holy. And to walk with that each and every day. Why? Because you have all these other identities that compete for what it means to be you. Now, those identities are not bad. For example, I'm a pastor. That's not a bad thing. I'm a dad. That's not a bad thing. I'm a husband. That's not a bad thing. All those things have enriched and made my life better. Just like I'm sure each one of you has a whole list of things that you are that has made your life better. But as you all know, life is a huge balancing act. And so the struggle that a lot of folks have spiritually is a struggle at saying, well, how do I make sure that I stay central to being a child of God first? And then how does that work with being a pastor or being a dad or being a husband? And the reality is you can't sort of silo each out. Because I'm not just a Christian who is also a dad, who is also a husband, who is also a pastor, right? I can't just say, hey, honey, I'm your husband for these 4 hours. I'm a dad for these 4 hours. I'm a pastor for those 4 hours. And never will any of those intersect. Any of you who are parents know that children don't work that way. By the way, any of you who are married should know that spouses don't work that way either. The reality is, each one of these identities inform all the others, right? Because the question for me to ask is not how am I a good dad or how to be a dad. It is how to be a dad, but also how to be a Christian dad. How to be a Christian dad who is also a good spouse. How to be a Christian dad who's also a good spouse and a good pastor. And how is God calling me into all these different important callings? And that is the basis of everybody's spiritual struggle. Mine, yours, everybody's. Because while your identities might be different than mine, and some of you surely are, there's always a struggle. How much of my life should get eaten up by work? How much of my life can I dedicate to my kids? How much of my life can I dedicate to my spouse? How much of my life should I dedicate to making money? Right? We all struggle with that. I don't know anyone out there, especially in coronavirus land, that has time on their hands. If you do, give me a call. I have lots of things you could be working on. Everybody is stressed out. Everybody is overwhelmed. Mostly not because they're doing anything wrong or bad or lazy. Mostly because they're trying to balance a ton of different identities and trying to figure out, what do I do with this 10-minute block? That isn't easy. But if we keep at the center of who we are, that we're children of God, we would have that conversation over, what do I do with this 10-minute block? Not just with ourselves, not just with our spouses, not just with our kids, not just with whoever else you might be talking to, but we'd carry that in prayer with God at all times, in all places. So I really think like that is the core struggle that we this Lent should work on. The other thing that I think we need to note when it comes to identities is, so far I've always talked about identities that are positive, right? Like, it is a positive thing that I am married. It is a positive thing for me that I have children. It is a positive thing for me that I am a pastor, okay? But the reality is, not all of us have only positive identities, right? Sometimes we're doing something we hate to do. Sometimes those labels or those identities are thrust on us and they're negative, right? Some of you might be the mess up in your family. Some of you might be the black sheep of your family. Some of you might be whatever, right? Those are common negative identities given to us, but they can come from anywhere. And so part of Lent is to sit down and to look at all those identities, all those things that make up who you are, and really ask two questions. Question number one, God, how do I balance your will for me with all these identities I have? And two, God, I have this list of identities. Do I need all of them? Are some of them negative? Are some of them hurting me? But even go further and say, are all these identities you want me to have? Because while an identity may not be hurting you, at least not in the sense of being negative, it could be distracting you from your real calling, from what God really wants you to do, the adventure God really wants you on, the life God really wants you to have. Some of those identities could be stopping you. I mean, I always got to sit back at the end of every NFL season while my Dolphins sit in the stands and watch the Super Bowl, whether or not it's a smart idea to be a Dolphins fan. You know? During Lent, we should sit with all our identities, whatever they be, and ask ourselves, are they helping us? Or are they identities God wants us to have?